What's up, fam, and welcome to Vessels for Glory, a brotherhood podcast where you and I are being shaped together to carry what matters most. This episode is the first installment to our series, The Making of a Man, and to kick things off, I want us to talk about men, pain, and the silence in between. But before I dive in, let me clarify what I mean when I talk about men being silent. I'm not talking about men being quiet in the literal sense, and I'm not talking about someone who doesn't speak much, perhaps, or someone who naturally is reserved, I hope, like myself. The kind of silence I'm talking about is quite different. It's the kind of silence where a man hides or conceals his emotional pain. In fact, some of the most silent men you'll ever meet are not quiet at all. They are the funny ones. They are the loud ones. They are the life of the party. You know, the guys with the biggest personalities in the room. You can think of people like Jim Carrey or Robin Williams, men who can basically make the whole world laugh while carrying deep pain privately. So before you dismiss this conversation or assume that, it doesn't apply to you or the men around you, it's important to understand this. Silence is not always about volume. Sometimes it is about what is not said. Okay. There is a book by Michael E. Addis. In his book, he wrote Invisible Men, Inner Life and the Consequences of Silence, the title of the book. He describes three types of silence that I think was useful for us to look at today. The first kind of silence is what he calls personal silence. This is where the pain is silent to the individual. The person concerned may not be even aware they have pain, let alone be alone to name it. And then he says there's actually a condition termed alexithymia, the inability to put your feelings into words. And according to studies, most men exhibit mild symptoms of this condition. And whether it's nature or nurture is not my focus today, but the fact that it does happen is what matters to me. And, they say that a problem clearly defined is half solved. Now imagine what that means if you can't even clearly articulate your feelings. And it's also important to note that even though the pain may be silent to the individual, it is not silent to the people around them. You see, the pain we carry or the pain we try to hide tends to leak out in various ways, and mostly in harmful ways to the relationships we have. I'm sure you've seen people becoming increasingly angry and bitter about life, and maybe somebody slowly becoming more withdrawn, or a teenager suddenly experimenting with drugs and alcohol. I've seen that in my own family, and refusing to come out of his own room and always wanting to be alone. All of that can be pain screaming, even though the individual himself is not aware of the pain, but the pain is there and it's making a lot of noise. The people around the individual can see it. The next form of pain he talks about is what he calls private silence. And this is where the silence or the individual makes the effort to silence their pain. There are a lot of reasons why this may happen. We'll talk about them in a moment. But here the man deliberately creates a gap between what is actually going on in his life and what people think is going on in his life. So he creates an impression that all things are right, even though they are not. He tries to look happier, more confident, more in control, while the reality says otherwise. And I think we as men have an unspoken rule that says, act as though all is right until all is right. And to be fair, there is some good in that. I mean, you can't just dumping your problems everywhere. And some battles are just yours and yours alone to fight. But sometimes the problem stays longer than you initially anticipated, and the gap between reality and the pretense becomes bigger than expected. So in other words, sometimes all never comes right, and you just left there acting as if everything is all right. And I've said this before. The burden of carrying a reputation you know you don't deserve is too hard for anyone to carry. And the third kind of silence it speaks about is public silence. This is when the pain is silenced by the world around the individual. I can't think of anyone who has never been a victim of this. I remember the week when my mother died, I was about 9 years old. A family member found me alone in my dad's room crying and basically told me I was being forward and that I should cut it out and just go outside and play with other kids. Such events, and many like them, they communicated clearly, and a clear message is saying, your feelings don't matter. You are not safe to be vulnerable here. And I'm sure there are other kinds of silence, but these three will suffice and are most telling actually. And I want us to move on and look at why do men become silent and just look at some of the reasons. And again, there are many reasons for this. We cannot cover all of them, but I just want to share from our own experience and just the little digging that I've done on this subject. Men become silent, and the silence is not always unhealthy or destructive. Sometimes the silence is good. In fact, John Gray, in his book Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, shares some insightful reasons for men's silence, and these I would say are the healthy ones. When you read from page 70, he says a man becomes quiet or silent when he needs to think about a problem and to find a practical solution to the problem, or he doesn't have an answer to a question, or he has become upset or stressed, or when he needs to find himself. And he talks about this book is for couples, so he says when a man falls in love, he loses himself, and then he needs to retreat and go to his cave to find himself again. But the point that he's making here is that silence can be a form of processing, can be a form of emotional regulation, it can be a form of self-recovery, and all of that is good. However, I must say that even healthy silence can become or can go wrong sometimes. For example, taking time alone to think through a problem is actually a good thing. Many men process things that way, but problem solving itself is a big deal to us as men, and we don't take it well when we can't solve a problem. One reason for that is that in many ways, men's value is often measured by the amount of problems they can solve. Unfortunately, you remember the trend that said indoda must do this, indoda must do that. You know, there are expectations placed on us as men, to be fair, placed on women as well. But it's no surprise then that for us as men, we end up attaching our sense of worth to our competence, and we can't fix a problem or a situation in front of us. The thinking subtly, quietly shifts from "I can't solve this problem" to "maybe I am the problem." Now, I'm not saying that this is how it should be. What I'm saying, however, is that in many cases, that's how it feels. And when that happens, a man may stay in the cave longer than necessary. The concept of the cave is from John's book. He may stay in the cave longer than necessary. And when he went there initially, he went to solve a problem. But somewhere along the lines, he ended up concluding that the problem is himself. And that was just a thought on healthy silence, a caution rather. Now we can move on to some of the unhealthy reasons for why men become silent. And for starters, I want us to talk about shame. Yeah, shame is a big silencer for men. Have you ever been in a situation where someone or even yourself attempted to be vulnerable and shared something personal, only for it to quickly turn into a roasting session? Yeah, you remember the embarrassment, and especially in high school, it can be very, very brutal. The group basically just let you fall flat on your face, and after experiencing or witnessing incidents like that, there's a built-in disincentive to even attempt vulnerability again in the future. Humor is a good thing, but when it is used to pour shame on an individual, it can be very lethal. And also, sometimes people are just flat out insensitive. They may not make fun of you in situation, but they brush it up in such a way that minimizes it and make you feel stupid for even bringing it up, and that can silence you in the future because of that embarrassment and the shame. And another reason why men are silent is because somewhere along the way they learned that their pain is not welcome, just like in my case I just shared. Maybe they learned very early that there's no place in this world for their pain. As a black man, I've heard songs like Indoda Ikali, Ikhalela Ngaphakathi. A man doesn't cry, he cries on the inside. Sadly, also, this is the last one, the church may silence your pain as well. Dr. Henry Cloud and his co-author John Townsend, they in their book How People Grow discuss 4 models of how people grow. This is on page 16, and one of them is the sin model, and this is how it describes it. The sin model said that all problems are a result of one sin. If you struggled in your marriage or within an emotional problem such as depression, the role of the helper or a leader was to find the sin and confront you, urging you to confess, repent, and sin no more. And if you did that, you were sure to get better. And it goes on to say that it was like many 3-point sermons which he had heard, which basically said the first point was God is good. Second point is you are bad. And the third point is that stop it, basically. The classical example is from the life of Job. His friends were convinced that he had sin in his life and he needed to confess. And most of the book, in fact, is about back and forth between him and his friends about his alleged sin. And I'm sure that there's other reasons why men carry pain like that in the church space, because maybe the church mishandled the pain. This podcast is not about gathering a following. It's about creating and creating engagement and fellowship. So feel free to drop a comment, or maybe a reason why men in your life or around you, become silent. I've thought about this, and I've been hearing a lot of conversations around, hey, man, pain are silently carrying pain, like the song Lonely Dirt Road by Dex. But I wanted to see in my immediate world if this was actually reflected. So just a few days ago, I sent out a short anonymous survey asking men about their experience with emotional silence, and the results are quite telling. 70% of men admitted that they sometimes struggle to identify or name what they are feeling. This is the silence. We talk about the personal silence. 90% of them admitted that they sometimes make the effort to hide pain. That's the private silence. 64% said were discouraged from expressing sadness or vulnerability when they were growing up. That is public silence. And 63% said that they felt pressure to appear strong or in control even when they are struggling. So the big question becomes this. If so, men are quietly carrying pain quietly this way. What is then a man supposed to do with his pain? Because if the world often doesn't have a place for it, and sometimes even the church mishandles it, where is a man exactly supposed to take his pain? That is what we're going to unpack next time. So join me. But so long, just remember this. We are vessels in formation. We are being shaped together to carry what matters most. See you.